Hi Year 10, Mr. Tapley here for your next lesson of Year 10 Geography. This lesson we are looking at developing our understanding of the PQE tool for interpreting data and summarizing geographical trends in maps and graphs. So one of the most important skills you can have in geography is being able to interpret visual representations of geography. So a map or a graph or even an image of an environment, you need to be able to look at that and tell me, what does it mean? Why is it important? And how am I going to explain it? It's very similar to source analysis in history that you guys did in your World War II unit. You would look at a primary source and you'd say, okay, here's what this history source is, here's what it means, and here's why it's important. So that's what you're doing today. You're working on your interpretation and your summary skills. So we're focusing less, I guess, on knowledge of environments and more on skills of how to summarize them, how to evaluate them. So the success criteria for this lesson is to explain each element of PQE, so pattern, quantify, exception, and then create our own PQE summary at the end of this lesson, the lesson activity. So to help structure your writing in geography, we use the PQE tool to accurately summarize geographical data in graphs and maps. So it's very similar to TEAL in English, where you have a set structure of here's what your paragraph should look like. In geography, to make your lives easier, every time I say to you, all right, what does this mean for a map or graph or what have you, it's really only 4 sentences going to be long. So 4 sentences, and it's going to be the same template every single time. Every time you're trying to summarize something in geography, you just have to remember those 3 letters, PQE. The first sentence of your summary, of your paragraph, tell me what the map shows or what the graph shows. So this map illustrates rainfall in Australia. This map illustrates population change from 2001 to 2011. This map shows deforestation in the Amazon rainforest from 1995 to 1996. So that's your first sentence. It's always going to be there. What is your map? What does your graph show? The next sentence, and I should say I'm not spending much time on this slide because I've got 1 slide each for pattern, quantify, and exception. This is more of a little intro template sample, I guess, to show you what a finished product looks like. So after I've told you what it is, I'm going for P for pattern. And you can see I've color coded this response as well to hopefully make things a bit easier to understand. So P for pattern. The general pattern or trend is blank. So I need to identify what the map shows you, what the data is showing. So whatever the graph on the map is measuring, is it increasing? Is it decreasing? Where and how? So if I'm looking at a map of the Amazon rainforest or a graph, and it shows that forest coverage is going down, that's my pattern. So I would say in 1 sentence, the pattern shows that forests are being cut down, deforestation, the end, full marks. It sounds complicated when I'm going through it, but it's really simple once you actually start to practice this stuff yourself. So the end of lesson activity will hopefully help you guys prepare for when you have to write a PQE in the dev task or in the CAT. So after you write your pattern, you need to prove it. You need to give me some evidence. So quantities. So it's Q for quantify or quantities. You're giving me some numbers, some examples that prove your pattern. So in that previous example I mentioned about the Amazon rainforest, I would then say, after explaining forests being cut down, I would say, for example, in 1995 we cut down 20,000 square kilometers of forests. So you just need to provide some numbers and some dates, some names. It's all about those values in Q, demonstrating your pattern. And then the final sentence is exception. So there are several exceptions to this pattern. For example, blah. So basically, in any map or graph you're looking at, it's probably not going to be perfect. You're always going to be able to find one city, one country, or one year that doesn't fit your pattern. Everything else was increasing, but your thing was decreasing. So you just need to point that out in your map or your graph. So let's say in 1992, forest coverage actually increased, because although we cut down a lot, the government decided that year, for whatever reason, that they wanted to plant a lot of trees. So that would be your exception sentence at the end there. So there are several exceptions to this pattern, for example, blank, and then you just try to explain why that doesn't fit your trend or your pattern. So again, it sounds complicated, but when you look at it, it's 1, 2, 3 or 4 sentences, and then you finish summarizing the entire map of the graph. So I'll take you through each step, and then we've got a little end of lesson activity for you to complete. So P for pattern. First step to summarizing the data in a map or graph is determine the pattern. And then I've got a little checklist for you to help you identify what the pattern is. So what is the purpose of the map? Look at your title, look at the legend. So if I look at the title of this map, Australian population change from 2001 to 2011. So that's the map. That's the purpose of this map. It's measuring population change in Australia. What is the data trend or pattern? So looking for common values or examples. So I can see a lot of this orangey, dark orangey brown color, kind of on the east coast, south coast of Australia. And then a lot of the blue in inland Queensland and New South Wales. And if I read that legend at the bottom there, you have to zoom in a bit, but basically the darker orange color shows population increase. So a lot of people have been born, have moved there. And then that blue color, the population has decreased. So they're actually losing population over time. So all I need to do is summarize that in 1 or 2 sentences. So we remember from our template, first thing I say is, well, what does the map show? So full marks to get population change. Map shows the change in population from 2001 to 2011. The overall pattern shows high population increase in coastal regions, specifically the east and southeast coast of Australia, and population decrease in lowest in central Queensland and New South Wales. So 2 sentences there. So what is the map? What is the pattern? What is the map? What is the pattern? And you're done. 1/3 down. The next step is to then prove that your pattern is correct. Demonstrate evidence. Provide supporting evidence that shows your pattern is legit. So you need to find some statistics, measurements, locations, or examples to quantify, to add quantities, numbers to your example. I'm basically looking for a calculator in this one. Yeah, I want to see lots of numbers in this second sentence. So if I've said in the previous slide that population increases are in the southeast and east coast of Australia, then that's what I'll say here. So population change is highest in Brisbane, Sydney, and Melbourne. So I've found some cities in the southeast and the east of Australia, and then I've told you what are they, so their location, their name, and also I've given you a specific number. So over 200,000 people over the last 10 years is population increase in Brisbane, Sydney, and Melbourne. But if we go back to that template I gave you, the best way to demonstrate your pattern is legit is to give a high and a low value. Don't just give me one example, give me a high and a low. So the high end of your pattern and the low end. So I've told you about population increase. Let's talk about these blue boys. So the population change is lowest throughout inland Queensland, New South Wales, and Tasmania at -2,000. So I've given you some of the names of places and the numbers for these blue regions here. 2/3 done. Last sentence, exception. In this section, you need to identify everything that does not fit the general pattern. So the exceptions to the trend. You should be identifying its name and also providing some numbers to back it up, so some examples. So in this previous map, if my pattern is that on the east and the southeast coast, we're seeing lots of population increasing, so those orangey colors, where else am I seeing that orange that isn't on the southeast or the east? Well, there's a little bit up here and a little bit over there. So that doesn't fit my pattern. I thought that all the increasing was happening over here, but there's actually a couple cities around the country that are also showing increases. So those are my exceptions. They don't fit the pattern, and that's what I'm talking about in this sentence. So the overall pattern shows high increases in the south and the southeast Australian coastal cities. However, the exceptions, Perth in Western Australia and Darwin in Northern Territory, also show population increases from 200,000 in 2001 to 2011. And that's it. If you smash all that together, it's going to look something like this. It's going to be nice and structured. What is the map? PQE. So my pattern, my quantities, and my exceptions. It's going to be 3 or 4 sentences long, and you'll get full marks for summarizing your map. So what I'd like you to do now, practice what we preach. So this learning activity will assess your understanding and skills of data interpretation. So you're looking at some geographical information, some trends, some patterns, and evaluating the meaning of this information. There's a cool little website that we'll use later on in the term called Gapminder, and it basically allows you to create your very own detailed graphs of any sort of data. So it measures education, literacy, income, disease, everything. We're not actually going to be making graphs on the website today. I don't want you to have too much to do in one lesson. So I will be providing you with a already finished graph. So it's a completed graph, and it shows income versus health. So your GDP, your average amount of money, versus your life expectancy. The worksheet questions ask you to identify and interpret the data, and then create a PQE graph summary. It's all available in Google Classroom assignments. I'll show you where that is now. So if we go to Google Classroom, we've got our resources up here, our slides, our textbook, and then assignments down here. And we want SEM 2 learning task, Gapminder. And then if you click on that Google Doc, it'll show you a few questions. Oops, I'll scroll down to the bottom there. And then it will show you this graph here. So the graph shows the health and the income of nations in 2015. Might look a bit confusing, but once you read the legend, which tells you what the colors and what those different size bubbles mean, you'll be able to understand what you're looking at. So we're measuring health over here, so life expectancy. So the lower it is, the poorer health you have in that nation. So in the Central African Republic, the average lifespan is 50 years. Whereas if I go up into a place like Japan, their average life expectancy is somewhere near like 80 something years. And then on the horizontal axis, we're measuring income. So that's the average GDP per person. So the average person in Somalia has less than $1,000 every year to their name. Whereas if I go to Russia, they're sitting somewhere between 16 and 32,000. The size of those bubbles is actually measuring the population. So the reason you can see places like China and India really easily is because they have a high population. So the size of the bubble shows you that it has a high population. And then the color shows you where in the world they are. So they've tried to group it all together nicely. So all those red countries like India, like China, Vietnam, Bangladesh, those are in the Asia, Oceania region. Yellow, you've got Europe and Russia, so West and East Europe. Blue is for Africa. Green, you've got North and South America. So you've got the USA up there, Ethiopia and Africa, Guatemala, it's a very tiny hard one to read. You can zoom in though. Anyway, so that's the graph that you'll be using to complete these questions. So question 1, most of these are really straightforward 1-mark questions. What do the color and the size of the circles in this graph represent? So you just need to look at the legend to answer that question. Question 2, what data is shown on the x-axis? So you guys are going to have to do a bit of research on what is the x and the y-axis. So basically you're measuring two things, the vertical and the horizontal. One of them is the x-axis, one of them is the y-axis. I'm going to have you guys do some research there yourself. So what data is shown as the x-axis, what is shown the y-axis? So the horizontal and the vertical lines on our graph. Question 4, describe the general pattern of the graph. What do you observe about the relationship between life expectancy, so health, and GDP, so income? So looking at our graph, do you see a connection between how rich you are and how healthy you are? So do you see that as this number gets bigger, this number gets bigger? Is there any pattern, do you think? So describe the general pattern there, 2 marks. Question 5, identify one nation with high levels of health and income and one nation with low health and income. So we'd go back here and we'd just be looking for the specific nations. So one that has a high health and income and one that has a low. So you'll be writing that down for question 5. Question 6, identify one nation that has high income but very low health, or low income but very high health. Why do you believe this nation has a different pattern to the others in this graph? So if I go to this graph, a country like, well, that's hard to read, but Equatorial Guinea, which is in Africa, they have a very high income, but their life expectancy is pretty low. Why is that? And hopefully you guys are recognizing that I'm trying to prep you for a PQE here. You can see question 4 is basically your pattern. Question 5 is your Q, you quantify. Question 6, your exception. And now we're bringing it all together in that last question, question 7. I've given you the template, similar to the slide, the first slide we looked at. So all you need to do here really is fill in the blanks. So use the information recorded in question 4, 5, and 6 to create a PQE summary paragraph for Gapminder graph. The template below will support your efforts. So really so this graph shows blank. So what are the two things we're measuring? The general pattern is blank. For example, yeah, I'm not going to keep going through that. But that's all you have to do for this learning activity. And then you submit that. The due date is August 17th, so next Monday, our next lesson. If you have any questions about that, please let me know. The other thing I did include in the slide was this little video here, because he does show you what we're looking at. You can see he's using the Gapminder tool, measuring health and wealth, income and life expectancy, and he shows you 200 different countries through 200 years in 4 minutes. I just thought it was really interesting, and the guy's a funny accent, and he's a bit over the top, entertaining, silly. So you can watch that if you've got a bit of time. Otherwise, best of luck, guys. Any questions, please let me know, and cheers.